All right, I'm going to kick us off. My name's Laura Patel and I lead Density's East Coast Enterprise team. And today I'm going to play a very small part in your lunchtime entertainment, helping to lead a timely conversation on what we've seen owners doing in terms of leveraging artificial intelligence in the form of sensor technology to optimize their buildings and enhance tenant value. So why does anyone care about how space is used? Well, the reality is real estate is the only asset class that we do not measure the performance of. And not that that ever made sense, but it makes even less sense now, given the abundance of available technology that can help us to do just that. 5 years ago, when you thought about sensor technology, you may have been thinking of a tool that helped you to understand how hot and cold a room was, which systems were on and off. But we've come a long way in just 2 years, and actually the pandemic has served as an accelerator, and we've come a long way in just the last 6 months thanks to it. And if you look 5 years ahead, there really isn't a future in which buildings aren't measured. And these folks are leading the way in kind of paving that new reality. I invited these three panelists because each of their firms are using Density's platform in a completely different and unique way to address completely different needs within their spaces. But also because I've kind of grown to revere them as innovators in the space in the years that I've known them. And I think they're just very interesting and generally good company as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy hearing their perspectives. I'm gonna let each of them introduce themselves. From there, you'll hear from me again for just 3 to 4 short minutes. I'm gonna provide some context on how different companies that aren't represented here today are using our technology from the owner standpoint. And then from there, we're going to dig into the panel discussion. I'm going to kick things over to Charlie to start us off. Then we'll do Nick, and then Eric, and then back to me.
Thanks, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Charlie Hobie. I'm the Managing Director of Product and Operations at EQ Office. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Blackstone. We're their U.S. office operating company. We oversee a portfolio of around 20 million square feet, primarily Class A properties in gateway markets. Our company has been around since around the late 80s when Sam Zell partnered with Merrill Lynch to buy for their first office building, San Felipe Plaza in the Houston Galleria. And we've certainly changed a lot since then. New brand, we were Equity Office at the time. And technology has become much more important focus for us. And in my group, we're continuously evaluating and implementing technologies to increase productivity and enhance customer experience. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Hi, folks. My name is Nick Hayden. I'm Director of Operations for the Related Companies and Hudson Yards and their commercial real estate in New York. Related Companies has been around for a long time. Steve Ross started the company many, many years ago, primarily focused on building affordable housing when he started out. That then became luxury residential and city centers. And then several years ago, ventured into some major commercial real estate in New York with the Time Warner Center. And then back in March of 2019, developed Hudson Yards. Hudson Yards is comprised of approximately 15 million square feet of real estate, mixed use, including residential condominiums, commercial condos, approximately 8.5 million square feet of commercial office. When it opened in March, it actually opened 95% occupied with, on the commercial side. We also have attractions known as The Edge, which is our observation deck over at 30 Hudson Yards. I've been in the industry a little bit over 30 years. Half my career has been with companies like JLL, and the other half of that career has been with ownership, like Related. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. I really enjoy working with Laura and the company, especially when we're talking about things like technology and innovation. Especially in our industry, I think it's really evolving every day and making us better operators. So I'm looking forward to having this chat today. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. And I'll round us off. My name's Eric Roseman. I'm the Vice President and Head of Technology and Innovation for Lincoln Property Company on the commercial side. So Lincoln Property Company Commercial is a full service operator. We do third-party management, leasing, construction management, on behalf of institutional owners of real estate, and we also own assets ourselves. We have about 250 million square feet of office assets across the United States. Strong concentration of assets in the Northeast, in the Southeast, Texas, and the West Coast. I also oversee our LPC Ventures effort, which is our subsidiary that focuses on technology innovation, investing, advising, and building. And so things that are going to differentiate our assets from the competition as it relates to technology is what I focus on. With the pandemic hitting, there's obviously been a focus on health and safety. And so we've pivoted our efforts on LPC Ventures, really focused on how do we safely reoccupy our office buildings and reduce friction points. But Lincoln Property Company is, is privately held, been around since the 50s. And we compete generally with the larger service providers. So excited to try to find ways to partner up with groups like Density and Laura to differentiate the way people experience our real estate. So excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So like I said, I'm going to talk for 3 hot minutes just to provide a little bit of context on how our larger owner client base have been using Density. Some of you may not be familiar with us, and so our hope is that this is just going to level set before we start to dive into the panel discussion. Once we jump into the panel, we're going to cover 3 topics. The first being sensors specifically, then we're going to get broader to talk about technology more generally, and then we're going to get even broader to talk about innovation and how each of these firms approaches that big challenge. As we go through this, please jump your questions into the chat. At the end, we're going to reserve about 15 minutes where we will go through your questions. So as they pop up, feel free to slot them in there, and I'll make sure to start at the top and work our way down once we get to the end. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so for anyone who's not familiar with Density, we are a sensor platform providing 2 sensors, one that measures entryways, which is what we would use to measure how a building, a floor, or a room is used, and then the other that measures open area, which allows us to understand usage down to the square footage. Going back to, probably about a year ago, owners caught on to Density. Primarily before that, we had been working with tenants. And like many things, the pandemic has actually served as an accelerator in us working more closely and more hand in hand with owners. And we work with them in 4 core ways. The first has been, and this is obviously a pandemic specific use case, but to help keep their own people safe. Owners have tried to lead the charge in helping to head back to the office before most of us. Many of the groups on this call actually have had their people back in the office since August. And so they really led the charge in figuring out how to bring their people back to work safely, empowering their employees to make safe decisions in the space, but also to feel safer when they headed back to the office, which in some regards is actually even more important. And so leveraging Density data, they actually started to surface our data to empower their employees on their return to work journey. And what I mean by that is providing visibility into the occupancy either of a whole building, of a floor, or something as granular as the restroom. Some of these shared amenities, ironically, kind of became the scariest and most dangerous places in a workplace. And so the more investment that could be made in ensuring that navigating that part of the workplace journey felt safe and secure for their employees was an investment that owners were looking to make, dating back to the early times like April, but super accelerated once those return to work plans were put in place in the late summer. The second way in which owners have been leveraging Density is to actually improve their tenant experience and to take those same learnings of helping to safely bring their employees back to work and extend those to the tenant. So instead of being within the owner's own workplace, that was taking that same approach and extending it out to shared amenities that the tenant may have access to. Things like a roof deck, a bike room, fitness centers, any of the things that were actually really closed down earlier in the pandemic because there was a perception of added risk for the owners with it being challenging to ensure that safe occupancy levels weren't exceeded. And so many of you who perhaps continued to head to the office amid the pandemic noticed that you lost access to some of those amenities. Many owners obviously wanted to make those available to their tenants, and so investing in the Density platform allowed them to do so while still mitigating their risk. And the beauty of this is even after the pandemic, a lot of them have taken the time and investment to integrate density data into their tenant experience apps, such that, you know, a year from now, when the pandemic is a thing of the past, I can be sitting at my desk and from the comfort of my desk, see how busy the fitness center is before I've actually grabbed my gym bag and traveled down. And if I see that it's busy, and I don't work out a lot, so I don't want to be embarrassed if anyone sees me, I can choose to go a little bit later in the afternoon. Third way, and perhaps the most robust and multifaceted, is to optimize building performance management and operations. And so we saw owners ingesting density data again into third-party technologies to do everything from automate the mechanical and HVAC system with a building automation system. So where you're actually driving your heating and cooling and other building functions relative to real-time occupancy instead of an arbitrary schedule. And taking that same thought process and then also integrating that with things like IWMS systems to be able to better manage and maintain the building's maintenance and operations. So especially amid the pandemic, all tenants are coming back on sporadic schedules, really expensive from the building operator standpoint to be able to maintain those shared spaces, because we don't have visibility into whether or not they're even being used with the same cadence that they were prior to the pandemic. And so leveraging density data, we've been able to do just-in-time cleaning and facilities maintenance, where you're only maintaining those spaces in response to actual visits or occupancy instead of, again, an arbitrary or static schedule that may no longer be relevant. And then the third and least glamorous or fun topic, but a super important one, is to ensure code compliance. So operators have access to density data in real time, live, both via their desktop, but also via their mobile phone. And they can also set alerts. And these are some of the examples that we'll get into as well on the panel. But anytime a space either reaches a certain occupancy threshold or exceeds a safe density level, they're getting a notification and they're able to actually troubleshoot that scenario. And then importantly, because some states are actually policing that density levels that have been mandated are not exceeded, the density dashboard actually has allowed operators to be able to go back historically and demonstrate compliance in submitting reportings to either municipal or state governments. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You all did not come here to hear from me today. And so I'm going to kick it over to our panel and kick off the discussion. It wouldn't be 2020 if we didn't have a question about the pandemic. So we're going to start there and kind of evolve off as the conversation goes. But building on what I just shared and those four kind of primary use cases that we're seeing most owners leveraging to be able to add value back to their tenants and optimize their portfolio, would love to just hear any color or additional comments the three of you have to add in terms of how your firms have specifically derived value from partnering with density. And Eric, I'm going to start things off with you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Laura. So as I think about the use cases, we're constantly asked, what's the current occupancy level of our buildings, right? And, you know, in California, where I'm based, it's much lower than places in Texas where it's been relatively more open. And it's been challenging to actually give concrete figures. And so psychologically, this cuts both ways, right? Because when you have a really occupied building right now during the pandemic, people are very scared. They're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of exposure. There's a lot of people coming through the space. And then on the flip side, when you have no one in there, there's this like social proof or consensus mindset of like, if no one's in, then I guess it's okay that I don't have to be in. And so we've used density and we've used people counting software to try to give some confidence. It's almost like when you see in the markets momentum building, right? Like in the stock market, people pile in when they start to see it going up. And so the same thing we feel is like, as we're getting confidence that more people are coming back and the numbers of people coming back go up, then it gives other people confidence. Okay, they feel comfortable, then we can start to come back. And so we've been using density. We've also employed some other strategies on like using Wi-Fi pings through some of our like lobby routers to try to give a clear picture back to our tenants that says like, hey, over the last couple of weeks, people are starting to come back. You can start to tell your own tenants that it's safer. Look at all the other tenants that are starting to stream in. So we've used it for that purposes. And I think that's been really helpful because tenants are operating in a vacuum. They're like, what are other people doing? If I know what other people are doing, then I feel comfortable. And then the second use case has been for the bathrooms. We really like density for showing how many people can actually go into a bathroom. And what's beautiful is like with safe, with density, it's like, it's no fluff. It's just like green says go, red says don't. And so it's really clear messaging. And we think that's really important as we get people back to a lot of our, brand new Class A office buildings. Like it just reiterates that this building is built for this next generation. So that's how we've been using density and people counting to date. I think I'll pass it on to Nick then to give his perspective.
Sure, thank you. So when the pandemic hit us initially, our first objective was to do everything we can to make sure that our tenants and our buildings were safe. But also we have the attractions. I mentioned we have an observation deck. We have the mall, which is pretty substantial, and ideally we'll get 30 to 40,000 people coming through. So it was really about developing a lot of layers to make people feel safe. Everything from enhancing janitorial protocols, but also infrared cameras to take people's temperatures, but doing it in such a way where people are sensitive about facial recognition software and things of that nature. So we wanted to make people feel safe, but also, maintain their privacy at the same time. And, density provides a tool that allows us immediate information that's pretty much agnostic, where you have other platforms that'll track people using cameras as opposed to just, as Eric mentioned, green or red dots. And it's a combination of, from a security or safety standpoint, it allows us the ability to be, we're already very proactive and diligent, for example, with our janitorial protocols. But for example, in public space, when I know exactly when the restrooms have been used and I can deploy a porter right behind those people, that's impressive service when you think of it from a user experience, but also from a safety standpoint, we're being about as diligent as we can. And then in addition to that, in New York, for example, one of our building codes drives requirements, for example, for fire life safety based on population in a building. And as we explore expanding the use of this technology to be able to know exactly when I've hit a certain threshold that triggers a certain amount of fire life safety coverage, allows me again to be operationally much more efficient in that regard. And it makes my building operations that much smarter. And I think, I know a product like density is a tool, that, you put in your toolbox along with everything else, and it complements everything you're trying to provide to your tenants, your operators, and also more importantly, your guests, right? Because people that work in our buildings are used to what we're doing. The key is conveying that level of service and safety to people that come here for the first time. And once we are able to do that in a way that doesn't create barriers, that makes people feel welcomed and safe at the same time, then I think it's successful for operators as well as the tenants in the building. So with that, I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Great, thanks guys. Yeah, so similar theme for me, just take maybe a step back. So since the early days of the stay-at-home or safe-at-home orders, we've been surveying our tenants and, with the goal of bringing folks back to the office safely and with confidence. So to the occupiers and tenants out there, thank you very much for taking the time to fill out those surveys. They're super valuable, and we do pay attention to them. A couple of themes emerge from those. One is that, folks, workers trust themselves, but they wanted to know as a landlord, what are we doing to promote enforcing the rules? So enforcing wearing masks, social distancing, et cetera. And then the second key theme was that they wanted transparency of communication around what were we doing, what are our policies and procedures, suspected or confirmed cases in the building, et cetera. And I think that density helps us really check both those boxes. One example is that we're using the sensors at Willis Tower in Chicago, which is a 4 million square foot vertical city. When full, we've got about 15,000 occupants. And the density sensors, we have them in strategic areas in the lobby and by the elevators, and they give us the real-time visibility and allow us to provide that real-time visibility to our tenants around traffic and occupancy patterns. And so a tenant can tell which elevator lobbies may be more crowded at a certain time of day, and we have around 100 elevators in the building, so that's valuable information. And then, which turnstiles may or may not be occupied. And so, it allows tenants to make their own decisions around when and where to enter the building, and then we can work collaboratively with our customers and devise staggered arrival schedules. And then last thing, importantly, as far as the transparency, it's available on the Laura talked about the building app, and so we're moving towards more convergence of our office technologies, and the goal is to provide as much information, building policies, what's going on in the building in that single location. So all super helpful for us in improving the customer experience.
So building off of that, and Nick, you kind of alluded to this, sensors are really, they're meant to make the buildings better for everyone, except when it comes to privacy, or at least that's sometimes the perception. Density, unlike a lot of other IoT platforms, you kind of alluded to this, is anonymous at the source, meaning that it's incapable of collecting any personally identifiable information by design. And that was a strategic decision by our founders. But with your tenants and guests' privacy in mind, what steps have you guys taken to ensure smart buildings and personal data can go, or I guess the avoidance of personal data collection can go hand in hand? I'm curious kind of what steps or activities you do as owners to safeguard that, walking that fine line.
Well, yeah, I can say from our side of it, from the outset, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we did is, a component of the protections we tried to put in included infrared cameras in our lobbies. And, in those cases, we put a procedure in place where we didn't ask what people's identities were. They have the processes, if you enter any of our real estate, you have to wear a mask. The screening happens in a manner where the camera's probably 10 feet away. And if it registers someone as a high temperature, for example, we just ask them to step to the side, we retake their temperature. But even through that process, we have no idea who they are. It doesn't matter if they're the CEO. Now, our tenants all are aware of what this process is, and they've all embraced it. But it doesn't matter what position the person has. Everybody's pretty much, dealt with in the same fashion. And frankly, we haven't had any incidents at all. But also realistically, technology being what it is, there's cameras pretty much everywhere these days. And the ability for facial recognition software and things of that nature is not really just limited to the building operations any longer. Anybody who's got an iPhone or that kind of tech can really get a lot of information, just generally speaking. But we take it, to the extent possible, until you register in the lobby desk or until you get a credential in the building, we respect everybody's privacy. And then after that, it just goes through the normal registration process. And we align everything also with the standards that our tenants expect. And not every building or every type of tenancy is the same. Some tend to be a little bit more lax than others. We establish, foundation at the building so people have a sense of security for the obvious, and also from a health standpoint. So now we do both things, right? It's not fire, life, safety. It's fire, life, safety, pandemic. So we kind of try to address it all. And then if we have a positive case, we do contact tracing, but everything is kept incredibly discreet. We don't speak about who the companies are or even give any information that could allow people, allow people's identities to be put out there. But with our tenants, we collaborate, and we also exercise contact tracing to the extent possible, and handle it that way as well.
I guess kind of building on that and kind of looping in a question that came in on the chat. How do you balance that though? Like, are there any technologies where you're like, man, that would be nice to have, but I can't see that being in the best interest of our tenants as much as that would be interesting information? Because Nick, you alluded like, MAC address technology that is collecting information that it's getting from your phone. You have cameras everywhere. So I guess to build on that, have there been technologies that you would have liked to invested in, but it really would have been only self-serving for you guys? And how do you make that evaluation as an organization? And actually, Eric and Charlie, like, love for you to chime in here too.
Yeah, I'll just comment quickly about the last question, which was privacy. I mean, gosh, like Nick said it well, which is you give up your privacy every time you open your phone. And obviously Apple's done a phenomenal job of safeguarding your identity, but like counting people anonymously should be like a very simple thing for us to answer, that like we are not infringing on your privacy. You know, we have a really good relationship with a no-touch access control provider, which plays really well with density, called OpenPath. And I can see where they have to, you know, kind of fight that conversation a lot. Like, how are you going to safeguard my identity? Because you now know when I walk into the building. And they have a phenomenal answer for it. And it's true. They don't actually hold any of your personal data or identification. But density is on like the furthest end of a breach of security. I mean, all it is doing is counting bodies based on thermal temperature and like the actual formation of what a human looks like. It is not infringing on your individual identity at all. I think one thing that like you hear a lot in when people talk about the future of office is this like idea that your office building will cater just to you. So you walk in, it knows that Eric's in, Eric likes his coffee, you know, with almond milk and 2 sugars, and he generally likes to listen to this music or see these things. And I think that kind of goes too far. Whereas like we're all kind of in this world now where when I say the word like Peloton bike, the next ad I see on this phone is going to be a Peloton or a bike. And it's like, we don't need that from our office building, right? And we as owners don't want to make you feel like we're another walking advertisement that you constantly have to deflect. And so I think when we talk about privacy and we talk about identity, it's ensuring that we're doing it for your own safety. We're not doing it to solicit you or sell your data or make money off of you, like some of these targeted ad programs are on your iPhone. We're doing this purely for like the anonymized public health reasons of why you would install technology and sensor information or sensor technology.
You know, and I think, you know, just to add a little bit to that, the interesting thing about the pandemic, our success in keeping COVID at bay is obviously our ability to protect ourselves and also to quarantine when we've been exposed. And the only way to really do that is if people feel comfortable raising their hand to say that they were exposed or they actually have it. And the only way people are going to continue to be able to do that is if they feel they can do that in a safe, anonymous way. Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. You know, my wife's a teacher, and one of her colleagues was exposed to COVID through one of the children. And then somehow the kids all broadcast that this one particular kid had COVID, and it became kind of like the scarlet letter in the classroom. And the problem, of course, there is now they doubt anyone else is going to admit they had COVID, right, if they get sick. And, you know, in buildings, I think sometimes we take for granted as operators or corporate real estate folks, we understand the business. We've been through H1N1, we've been through SARS and all of that, and the avian flu. But the average employee in a building rarely sees this side of our business or has to deal with a pandemic that gets so much play as this does and has heightened awareness so much and fear that it puts a great burden on everyone who manages real estate to handle it in a manner that allows people to have discretion and stay safe, but be willing to raise their hand when they've been exposed.
Yeah, let me just talk about that a little bit. Nick, Eric, I assume that you guys have had the same reaction, but we've found that we don't need technology for contact tracing in our office buildings. People have been very forthcoming as far as where they were and how they contracted the virus and allowed us to communicate that. And again, you have to be thoughtful about it. You know, we don't want anyone to have the scarlet letter in our buildings where their occupants are better than children, obviously. But so I think we found a lot of just being mindful, being thoughtful, being proactive, communicating as transparently as possible. I think people understand that you can't there's certain, privacy issues. And so you build up credibility that way. The other thing that I'll just add to the privacy concern is, you don't have to, take our word for it or not, but there are, pretty stringent, government regulations around this. The GDPRs in Europe, most, we've got a patchwork of, state and other regulations in the U.S. right now. My guess is something more stringent is coming, but Illinois, for one, is one of the most stringent states as far as governing data privacy, and we've installed the density sensors in Chicago. And so, setting aside our reputational risk, which we value super highly and don't want to put at risk, there's pretty good regulations in place around this tech and density passes.
All right, we're going to pivot to one last question about sensors, and then I want to broaden the discussion to just talk about technology in general. And so save the best for last. The all-important question of how are you leveraging sensor technology to actually make a buck? So what monetizable efficiencies have your businesses been able to see or observe as a result that have helped make this investment a no-brainer for your teams? And Nick, I'm going to start with you, and then Eric and Charlie, feel free to jump in from there.
Sure. I think, once our populations get back, we'll be able to prove out a lot of this. But, part of it is, when it comes to the obvious, for example, our janitorial spend, as opposed to, generally deploying personnel to provide a lot of coverage, they could be covering areas that really haven't had any traffic at all, but there's no way for us to tell that. With sensor technology, we can tell how much traffic an area has had, which allows us to be a lot more strategic about how we deploy our personnel. So that's a real direct, direct correlation to how we can save on those operations. However, on the other hand, as far as enhancing our revenue, it goes back to tenant experience as well, right? It's one of those additional tools we have to enhance our customer experience, whether that's, in our commercial office buildings or in our retail space. And the better those experiences are, it'll enhance our tenant retention, it'll create conversion for our retail centers, it all cascades one into another. The direct black and white operating expenses is really specific to janitorial material, security deployment, and things of that nature.
Nick, you said something when I was talking to you a couple of weeks ago. It was something like, we can have the most beautiful buildings in New York. I don't know if you remember this quote, and they can be the highest performing. And if we don't have a single tenant, it's a failure. So right. I think it kind of lends itself to what you were sharing there.
Yep, it's true.
Yeah, we're all competing. Sorry, this is not in response to the question, but we're all competing with your own kitchen, your own dog, your own, 10-second commute. That is what we're all competing with our assets.
100%. I think people want to come back to work, though, and they'll want to come back to work certainly once they get here and feel safe, and know that we're doing everything we can for them to have a good experience here, because I think working from home can get a little old after a while.
Yeah, I think everybody. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks. I think your comment is a good one. We spent a lot of time talking about how do we draw folks back to the office, and sensors and having a good experience is one part of that. There was a CBRE occupier survey that had a stat that was a little bit discouraging to me. It was 50% of people come to the office because they're told to. And so, we're trying to switch that equation a bit. And I think that, providing, great spaces for collaboration and a better customer experience is one way we get that more voluntary people drawing them back to the office versus pushing them.
So let's pivot the conversation to talk more about kind of technology as a whole. The tech landscape is very complicated, and it can be sometimes very confusing for companies, owners, or tenants. How have you helped to identify needs within your organizations or within your tenant base? And then how do you go about selecting technology partners to align with you in addressing them? And given that as a free topic.
I'll take a stab at it. I'll start it. I think there is a general ethos I look for of companies recognizing that they are not going to be the silver bullet, one size fits all solution for all of our real estate problems. A lot of entrepreneurs try to come into this space and say, oh, we're going to modernize technology, and they try to attack everything. And we all know in life, to be amazing at anything, you have to specialize. And so we look for partners that are a little bit more mature in their growth stage of their life cycle. And we look for companies that acknowledge that they are just our one solution in a bigger ecosystem, and they speak well with others. Density, for example, has spent a ton of time and a ton of money on building an open API and SDKs that speak really well to HQO, and they speak to RISE, and it speaks to OpenPath for access control. And so we look for that same mentality for all of our point solutions. So are they the best solution for our problem? Like, we need to talk to our tenants more. So tenant engagement is critical. We need to count how many people are in common areas, lobbies, bathrooms. Does it speak to our tenant engagement solution? We need something that's going to be for video conferencing. Video surveillance. Does that speak well to our building management system? Does it speak well to our no-touch access control system? And if they say no, and the answer is, well, we do all of those things, that's generally a red flag for me that they're not going to be the right solution for us. So that's how I think about it. Interoperability and finding the best point solution.
The only thing I would add is we have someone who's really smart technically, like Eric, who can get under the hood of these companies and evaluate their tech stack, and and then we don't also necessarily take their word for it. We start small, we pilot, and demonstrate the technology works, and frankly, we're not concerned or not hesitant to pull the plug if a pilot fails. So we've definitely been on the bleeding edge before, and I'm sure we'll make mistakes again. But we try to stick to those principles of before we get too enamored with something.
Charlie, I just want to correct you. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just know how to use the word SDK and API. So don't be fooled. Don't be fooled.
So yeah, drop acronyms with me, and I assume you're smart. So you shouldn't have corrected me.
I just have to make a list of all of those. I agree with what everyone has said. I think the most important part for me, the obvious stuff as far as looking for solutions. The usual HVAC, all of that kind of thing is, the routine stuff. I find that I usually discover that I need something, without realizing I needed it until I see what the technology is. People are coming up with stuff that I never thought of, and so for us, it's really about being open to looking at a different technology. We've done it with ultraviolet light. We did it with, all kinds of tech, whether it's, electrostatic cleaners, all of that. And there's a lot of stuff we toss out and say, it won't work. I think the key is really to figure out how much you can look at. And obviously you can't look at everything. And we have a very robust IT group, which is great. And they can kick the tires on us and figure out if it can work with our platform. But operationally, it's really important that the operators are open to working, outside of the lanes they're comfortable in, and seeing if whatever that tech is, if they have a vision to see it work. And oftentimes, I'll have a provider come in and demo something for us, and they figured out how I can use it best, and then we end up figuring out a way to repurpose it. Like 5 years ago, we took a security guard tool that was used for like watchmen, doing rounds on a site. And we repurposed it to validate that our engineers are making rounds in the back of house. So I think the real key is, be prepared to to change, how you approach the business and listen to all the tech that's out there, all the providers that are out there with all these innovative ideas. Because most of those guys are usually from a tech environment. They're not used to running the real estate. And I think if you can partner with them and figuring it out, you'll end up with some good product.
So last question to round out technology, and I know we're kind of getting to the final parts here with question and answer, but we've tiptoed around the topic of tenants. It's woven its way into some of the answers to the other questions, but owners have almost seemed singularly focused on the bottom line in the past, and it feels like that has radically evolved, especially in the last few years, to more of a focus on experience and kind of tenant retention and amenities. It can be hard, though, if not impossible, to quantify return on investment in some of those tools that help to attract and retain the tenants. And so I'm curious just to hear, with that very, very narrow focus, how have you guys been able to make those justifications internally to perhaps some of the bean counters who really want to be able to monetize some of those benefits? How do you think about that investment that you're making in your current and your future tenants? And Charlie, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll start. I mean, yeah, it's a tricky question.
I should add that I started my career as a bean counter. I should get that out there in case I've offended anyone. Go ahead, now, Charlie.
Right. Yeah. It's a tricky question. I think that, I mean, ultimately where we come back is how we answer it. And the reason why so many companies have focused on the experience is, first of all, let's be honest, it was relatively lousy, right? And so that we as an industry, I think we're lagging as far as, thinking about human-centered design and thinking about, the hospitality and drawing people into the office. I'm as guilty of that as the next person. So I think it's an evolution for us. And the reason why it makes sense is because if you think about, typical office rents, depending on where you are 40 to 60 to, $90 a foot per year, and operating expenses are, 15 to 20, 25. And so the real leverage in our business, there's only so far you can go on saving expenses. And if you believe that, a few pennies of investment to enhance that experience, can move the top line, then it certainly, makes sense from an investment standpoint. And then, and the other thing, I mean, we do is we don't just kind of sit back. I mean, we observe and we ask our customers and you talk to them and look at how they're, using their space and using our spaces. And you don't have to just kind of take it on faith that certain things are adding value or not. You can either ask or observe which technologies are making a difference.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question. Oh, go ahead, Eric. Were you gonna add to that?
Yeah, no. I mean, the way we've thought about it, we've been spending a lot of time on just our lease up. Our lease up properties right now that are of highest focus, and how do we get more tour volume and how do we stand out, because there's this flight to quality, right? Like if you're looking for office space in New York City, you're running to Hudson Yards first because it's state of the art, right? And so for us on the West Coast and in DC and parts of Texas, for spaces that maybe aren't moving right now or not making tour lists, we see density as somewhat of a marketing expense to get people to come look at our space as a differentiator. And so when we can kind of lead with that as a differentiator, that, we'll be able to give you confidence, real-time confidence in how many people are in your space at any given time. We'll do the IWMS, just-in-time cleaning. All of that is, for us, the new version of throwing like a broker event. Right? It's the thing that's going to get somebody to come see, like, even if it wasn't on the list before, it's like, oh, I got to see this. So that's how we're justifying the cost, and we're trying to get our owners comfortable with it, which is, this is a new world, and this has to be viewed as a marketing expense, not just a recoverable, operating expense.
Yeah. And that hits it right on the head, I think. And the way, when you think about our tenants, their focus now over the last 10 years has been about workplace experience. I mean, that's something that's also evolved. And so basically it's really about giving our customers what they want. And they're competing for talent, and that comes with why they're focusing on workplace experience. That's why they want places that are environmentally friendly, and all of that. And they want the hospitality environment and all of that. So it's really as simple as, giving your clients what they want and making them successful.
All right, I have 2 lightning round questions, so try and answer really quickly, and then we're going to move to the audience questions that have been submitted. The first is, besides Density, obviously, what's another prop tech company that everyone should know about and be looking into, and what specifically, in terms of the need, has that helped you address in your portfolio?
Ooh, which child do I promote? This one's really topical, but I think with everything happening right now around renewable energy and the regulation that's pushing towards making our buildings more net zero and reducing carbon impact, I think having a relationship with one of the energy efficiency providers is crucial. And so there's 2 sort of sides to that. There's the ongoing energy efficiency software, making sure your building is regulated. And then there's like these relationships of basically development partners that will come in and greenify your building, right? So they'll look at the motors and bring in new motors. They'll remove your chillers. Like they'll do all the CapEx work. So for us, that's Gridium. And we've been able to recognize millions of dollars of savings across our portfolio in making our buildings more energy efficient. So I would say for any owner, you need to find your partner, whether it's Gridium or somebody else, that can be, that can create value from day one on reducing your energy expenses at your assets. And there's government subsidies aplenty for this space.
I think that's a good one. I think we have a bunch of, or a number of occupiers on. So I'm going to mention a tech that Eric already mentioned. I think OpenPath is one that people should, at least some form of touchless access, or should be evaluated by occupiers. I mean, we're certainly looking at it as a talk about the customer experience of visitor registration, getting from parking lot to your suite, with one device versus multiple, or using key cards, losing key cards. That whole process is relatively antiquated. And then because it's Giving Tuesday, I'll give a plug for Blackbaud, which is helps coordinate social giving initiatives, and it's really for everyone. We're using it as part of our ESG initiative. So if you're not familiar with that one or analogs, you should check that out.
And so from my end of it, I'd say, we have a lot of tech, but one of the ones that I think is, best one for the time is it's called Morpho. It's a frictionless access system. It's very effective. We have it in place in 30 Hudson Yards. We use it for ourselves as well. Works great for access control.
Sorry, I totally lost my internet connection there. Last question is, this is perfect timing for me to jump back. 9/11, following that, we kind of saw a lot of technologies that were thought to be just temporary end up becoming long-term technologies that we still see today in our buildings. Which technologies that you've implemented to help with the pandemic do you think have staying power? And again, just lightning round answers on that.
I can say for our side of it, pretty much everything we've deployed will stay. We might put the infrared cameras away for a bit, but generally speaking, whether it's the janitorial specifications, density technology, all of those things will make us better operators and continue to keep us as safe as possible with potential the next pandemic or next bug that comes out there.
Yeah, I think once it's in, it doesn't get ripped out, this technology. It's such a battle to get it in, to change hearts and minds, to go from, the way things are done to a new approach. So I truly think everything will stay for the most part. And I think anything that has hardware in it or is hardware focused will stay. So no touch access, occupancy sensors, once it's in and it's collecting data, it's invaluable. And so you're not going to want to rip that out.
I agree. I mean, yeah, we're not, I don't think doing anything that doesn't have longevity past, vaccine and herd immunity. And just on the occupancy sensors, I mean, it's something we didn't talk about. I mean, there's so much uncertainty as far as, how folks come back to the office, how they utilize space. What does work from home or work from anywhere mean? I think there's going to be more and more interest in how much and what functions our spaces and occupier spaces take, and so I think that data will have value certainly beyond our current pandemic crisis.
All right, we're going to dive into audience questions. In case anyone has been keeping their questions, feel free to again drop that either in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we'll get to those. The first audience question was, can building owners use density for many buildings and in different cities or throughout the same city? Does anyone want to take that? Eric, that might be a good one.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't answer one of your previous questions about monetizing, like how do you actually monetize some of this data? And so it fits in here. There are real estate owners, really savvy real estate owners that are coming from more of the hedge fund world that are doing more of a ground up approach to collect data, collate data, and then make thesis driven investments based on that. And so density's role can actually be met, just like I think density as well as access control point solutions are critical in helping people understand how often people are coming in or how often, how many people are occupying buildings. And so that data across different regions is critical to inform the next investment decision. If you're a hedge fund or you're a private equity firm and you say, hey, I want to go buy in Kansas City, for example, because people that work and live in Kansas City are all going to the office, whereas maybe in Utah or Salt Lake City, it's less so. And so maybe the demand is lower. So that's the kind of information that you can answer with density. So having density across different locations is going to be able to allow you to compare and contrast demand for office space. And so I think this works best when you do put it across geographies. So you actually have some comparison and benchmarks.
Speaking to cost too, and then Nick and Charlie, please jump in if you have an opinion on this. If you're using, one of the things that we see is because companies almost operate like little mini companies regionally, or even building to building with some owners, where there isn't a lot of best practice sharing. And so each building is almost reinventing the wheel themselves. And what that means is you have a lot of disparate systems that don't speak to each other. And if you want to centralize and compare and contrast that data, it means that you're having to invest in a third sort of data aggregation layer, like a Tableau. And so I guess selfishly, to answer that question, there is actually benefit to choosing one solution and deploying that at scale across your portfolio, because it means you're comparing apples to apples and you're able to actually make valuable business inferences. All right, anybody else want to touch that, or have we kind of answered that one? I think we answered it, so all good if not. Okay, next question, and this is actually a great one to unpack. I'm going to kind of suck three questions into one, but there was a lot of questions around integrations. So it says, this was the person who built the question out the most. Integrations were mentioned a couple of times. Is your expectation that the tech will have to be an out-of-box integration, or should owners be prepared to spend time and money helping to develop the integrations? Would love to hear your perspectives on how each of you have had to navigate perhaps with an integration for the first time. My answer from the density standpoint, though, is integrations are out of the box if someone beat you to it. So if you are using a technology that somebody already asked for, then that's out of the box and it's going to exist for you. If you are using a less common provider, or one that we have just never been asked to integrate with before, there is going to be some work. The one thing I will add as a clarification though is density is actually typically the data that is being ingested, not the platform that is ingesting the data. And what I mean by that is we're providing our people count via the API to the cloud, which means that the third-party technology is then picking it up and using that to action some sort of secondary process, whether that's issuing a ticket to have a restroom serviced or turning down the air conditioning. That data is being consumed by the other technology, not by density. And so I can't speak to costs. It kind of depends on how big of a stick you have with that other third-party technology and how big of a customer you are, whether or not they're going to be willing to invest the time in making that integration. But Eric already alluded to this. We have a really clean and easy to use API, so it's usually a really seamless process. Would love to hear from you guys though, how you've tackled integrations, because I think that question actually is relevant to not just the density context.
My only comment here is, and this may be obvious to other folks, but it wasn't to us. We ran into an issue where we were relying on technology partners to integrate, and because they were both contracted to us, there was a lot of finger pointing that ended up, and so it took a lot longer, it was a lot more painful. And so our going forward strategy is contract with someone and then they own the integration, unless there's some reason, like say you're doing an oddball integration where you want to own that for some reason or proprietary or whatnot. But that's my just kind of strategic business person hat, non-technologist advice for folks who are looking at integrations, because there are a lot of promises and commitments that are being made out there.
Eric, would love to hear your perspective. So have there been, for example, technologies that you have wanted to integrate as a part of your stack that didn't talk to each other, and how did you guys navigate that process?
Yeah, so a good example would be like with Jones, which is insurance software. I know Steve, who's a friend and an executive on the team, is on the call. And, you have this like promising piece of software. We're really excited to use it. And then we rely on sort of a bigger platform to manage our property management solutions. And so what we've tried to do is make sure both technologies understand how important each of them are to our business and how we need them to speak to each other. And so, the best thing we can do is try to create a relationship between those two parties and call it, broker that relationship, if you will, and really rely on those individual partners to figure out the integrations themselves and spend their own resources. We have not, we just run pretty lean. Like, we don't have people who can oversee an integration process between two technologies. So we really put the onus on the companies and hope that they find enough value in working together.
Fair. All right, we're at exactly 2 o'clock. I promised a timely conclusion. Thank you to our 3 panelists. You guys were awesome. I know I speak for everyone in saying that was really insightful, so thank you for carving out the time. Everyone that's still on the call, you will be getting a copy of this recording in case you wanted to share it with any of your team members, and also a copy of our blog post that'll kind of summarize some of the themes that were discussed here. Giving Tuesday, I'm going to echo Charlie as a kind of a shameless plug, but please go out, kind of counterbalance whatever money you spent on TVs and electronics on Cyber Monday by doing something good for your local community. Thanks all of you for joining, and have a happy holiday season.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Great to see everybody.
Laura.
Happy holidays.
Take care.
See ya.